Hello, I am Ruby Falconer. Today's date is February 15th, 2021, and this is a Shamanic Egyptian Astrological update for the upcoming week. We have a busy astrological week ahead of us. The last 2 to 3 weeks have been fairly quiet from an astrological perspective. They have been dominated by the oncoming square between Saturn and Uranus, which will be exact this week on Wednesday the 17th. This is the first of 3 squares, exact squares. There will be one in June, one in December, and one this week. And the first one, which is this week's, what tends to happen with these kinds of squares between the big outer planets, or really any kind of astrological relationship that involves the big outer planets, is the first pass. There's usually 3, sometimes more, but the first pass kind of catches us off guard in some way, or we're not quite sure what it's about. We're still trying to figure it out. The second pass, which happens when the planets are retrograde usually, means that we're figuring it out. And then the third pass, we have an opportunity to, in a sense, use what we've learned from the previous 2 passes. So this is the first, and it is therefore the one that is going to be the most unconscious, in that it is new energy coming in that we're dealing with in some way. And I talked about this last week, and I've talked about it various times. The nature of this energy is very much birth energy. And it's specifically that part in the birth process where the waters have broken, the baby's too big for the womb, the contractions have started, but the cervix hasn't opened yet. And so the way this tends to go is the contractions happen and then it's quiet. Then the contractions happen and it's quiet. The baby's moving. The mom is trying to get the baby to move. If she's awake, the contractions are happening and then it's quiet. That's the period that we're in, and we will be in various permutations of this all year long. So we're in this kind of birthplace where the energy is starting to build and there is something wanting to be born. But as with all births, we don't know what it's going to look like once it manifests. All births are dangerous, all births are messy, all births are challenging, and that's where we are. So we've been in that kind of, last part of the pregnancy. Mom wants to go to the hospital or call the midwife and give birth, but it's just not been time yet. And we're in that process where we're going to begin the first phase of this birth this week. So we can kind of look at everything that's been going on, and this sort of stuck feeling that most of us or many of us feel is related to this energy, and yet also the feeling that there is new life really stirring and new life wanting to be born. So it's that synthesis. In the Egyptian pantheon, Saturn is Sobek, the old king, who gives form to things, which is a very useful thing to do. He's also wise. He knows a thing or two, but he has a tendency to hang on too long and not want to let go of forms. In many ways, Saturn, Sobek, is associated with the concept of the patriarchy, which is not about gender. It's not about men. The patriarchy is about a system of thinking that has been in predominance on this planet really for thousands of years. And the essence of this process, this way of thinking, is to overemphasize action and to underemphasize receptivity. And so there's a break in the balance between we could think of it as expansion and contraction. There's a break in that. There's a break in the balance in duality. It's kind of like we're hanging out on one end of the spectrum to the detriment and to the neglect of the other end of the spectrum. And we've suffered a lot on our planet because of this. Certainly those people who have been born in the feminine gender have suffered, or those who have identify strongly with what we could consider to be feminine traits. But I hesitate to refer to feminine and masculine because this really isn't about gender. This is a system of thinking that overvalues one end of a polarity over the other. So there is this imbalance. And the basic polarity is about receptivity versus action. The way things are designed to work, ideally, is we know what we want to receive, You know, in the astrological terms, this is Venus. We know what we want to receive. We determine that. It's Isis in the Egyptian pantheon. And it is our yin. It is the receptive side of our personality. Again, doesn't matter what gender we are. That manifests action and sends action out to get what we want. That's Mars. That's yang energy. That's Set in the Egyptian pantheon. And so action is meant to be directed by values. It's the long and the short of it, and we've lost contact with that in many areas of our collective and personal lives. And I really do see the time that we're in, it's been going on for many years, but it's definitely picking up speed, is that we are really bringing these two into balance. You know, I from my perspective can view my entire lifetime as having been in exercise and attempting to bring in the yin and the yang polarities into balance, both within certainly my personality, that's been part of my path and my road in life, but also collectively. You know, I was born in 1949, and so I grew up in the 50s, which was very skewed, you know, very out of balance. You know, I'm speaking here about the United States. And so the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, we've had this continual process of trying to bring the polarities into balance and having a certain amount of success. And yet, as an overriding cultural theme, not just in this country but worldwide, there is still an overemphasis on yang and an underemphasis on yin. And we still have a ways to go before we act and manifest from our hearts, from our values, what we receive. You know, this is Ptah's message, who is the archetype, the Egyptian netter, who's most associated with Aquarius. And for me, this is the meaning of the traveling that we're doing into the Aquarian age. I don't think we're there yet, but things are certainly picking up speed. And the issues about, you know, what this is about, which is about, you know, attempting to hold equal value with the rights and needs of the individual versus the rights and needs of the collective, to hold that in equal balance, and also to understand that everything we create, everything we manifest, needs to be connected to our heart. You know, it needs to be connected to love, or it will do great damage. That is Ptah's message, who is the Egyptian netter, who is associated with the sign Aquarius. So I view everything from that lens. You know, everything that's happening, that's the measure that I take of it. You know, what's going on around that. So the period that we're in right now, this Saturn-Uranus square, is a furtherance of this. You know, last year we had Saturn, the Sobek, the old king, in relationship with Jupiter, Horus, and with Pluto, Osiris. And we saw a real breaking down and a real constriction of life as we've known it. And we are in this place now where we are experiencing a kind of a battle. You know, there's a split. You know, I'm coming to see this Saturn-Uranus square as a split. It's a split, a tear in consensus reality. It's a split and to tear in society, in collectives, in countries, in families. You know, we have so many situations, and I'm sure you have this in your own life, where someone that you love very much and care about, the two of you can look at the same situation and see something very different. And you both feel you're right, which is always interesting. So, you know, this attempt to find truth beyond our individual subjective perspective is part of the challenge of this time, and that does bring up that essential question of what truth is anyway. So, you know, so those are some of the bigger questions that I see are behind the experience that we're having this year during our Saturn-Uranus square. And we have, over the last couple of weeks, definitely been feeling the pressure around this birth process. You know, we are in the process of birthing a new age, which is going to take a while. You know, it's not something that we're going to do today or tomorrow or even next year. It's a process that we're going through, of birthing a new age. We are in the process of birthing new societies, new collectives, new tribes, new families, new connections, and ultimately a new planet. And so it's a big deal. You know, it's going to take some time. And as I said earlier, birth is traumatic, it is exciting, it is exhilarating, it is exhausting, and it is sometimes dangerous and messy. It is transformative. It is all of those things. And this is where we are. We will feel it more intensely at certain times, and this is one of them this week with Saturn and Uranus coming into their exact square. And we will, you know, feel some relief from it at other times as it kind of recedes away. And that will happen later this spring. So we also have this week, we're going to have the moon moving into Taurus. And, you know, in traditional astrology, the moon kicks things off. So if you have something like a Saturn-Uranus square, which is sitting there, you know, it's kind of happening, when the moon comes along and comes into relationship to it, it kicks off whatever the external events are going to be that are a reflection in some way of this particular astrological manifestation. And I don't pretend to know what that's going to be. I'm always, you know, I'm an observer, and I'm as surprised as anyone else when I see what happens, you know, as a result of these transits. But what we can know is that the moon's going to come into a relationship to both Saturn and Uranus. The moon moves into Taurus on on Tuesday, the 16th at 10:12 p.m., and that's Eastern time. I live on the East Coast, so when I refer to times here, it's going to be Eastern time. And the moon will stay in Taurus until Friday morning, the 19th, when it's going to move into Gemini at 11:04 a.m. Again, that's Eastern time. In the intervening period, particularly Wednesday and Thursday, the moon is going to be moving in relationship to the Aquarian planets and the Taurian planets. And we have this ongoing square, not just between Saturn and Aquarius and Uranus and Taurus. We have lots of other planets that are grouped around them. You know, we have the Sun, we have Mercury, we have Venus, Jupiter and Saturn all in Aquarius. That's 5 planets. And then we have Mars and Uranus in Taurus. And this week we're going to also have the moon in Taurus. So, you know, these two signs are square, and they're both fixed signs. Fixed signs are just what they sound like. They are fixed. You know, their work, their job is to kind of take the energy and settle it, you know, to settle it in form. Taurus is very much about settling in the body. Taurus is Hathor, the ultimate earth goddess in the Egyptian pantheon. And Aquarius, which is an air sign, and it is about a certain type of fixity of the mind. You know, its fixity expresses itself through its visionary qualities of looking to the future and perceiving what it is that most benefits the collective. It's very much a sign of planetary service, but it's looking at what it believes, the path that needs to be walked, and it's quite certain about that. You know, so we have fixed signs tend to get into power struggles with each other anyway. The fixed signs are Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius, and they do tend to, you know, kind of, you know, they square off with each other. You know, their relationships are squares, and they're all very fixed in their own way. You know, Taurus is a fixed earth sign, Leo's a fixed fire sign, Scorpio's a fixed water sign, and Aquarius is the fixed air sign. So within their respective elements, they settle in, and they're kind of hard to move. They're stubborn. You know, they can be quite immutable. You know, they're going to stay put. So, you know, when they come into relationship with each other, we can expect some clashes. You know, that's how these signs work. So we got a strong fixed sign energy going on this week. And the, you know, what's going to be happening is the moon in Taurus is going to move through squares to Saturn, then Mercury, which is retrograde. It will turn direct this week, also to Jupiter and Venus, and it'll move through a conjunction to Uranus and Mars. And particularly on Wednesday, the 17th, we are going to see at 12:48 p.m. Eastern, the moon's going to move through a square to Saturn and a conjunction to Uranus, which will already be square to one another. The exact square happens 2 hours or an hour and a half later at 2:08 p.m., but basically they're square all day. So that's when the kind of, whatever this energy is, however it's going to manifest in your life or out in the world, it will be on Wednesday, and it will be midday on the East Coast when you can expect that energy to manifest. And then the moon will move on. It will square Mercury retrograde that evening. And Mercury's slowing down to station. It's going to be turning direct on Saturday. Mercury turns direct in Aquarius in the evening, 7:52 p.m. And it will be on the 11th degree of Aquarius when it turns direct. So we'll have Mercury stationary for a couple of days in there. And whenever a planet is stationary, its effect is very strong. So we'll be feeling a lot of that energy of Mercury in Aquarius. Thoth, the Egyptian pantheon allied with Mercury in Aquarius, Ptah, very much wanting to focus on the vision and what it wants to create. So, for all of us, it's a very inspiring time, in terms of being in touch with our own creativity and our own capacity to envision what it is that we want to bring out into the world. And that's a good thing to do when Mercury is stationary, preparing to turn direct, which will be pretty much Thursday, Friday, Saturday is when this energy will be most prominent. It's a good time to think about, okay, the whole purpose of the 3-week Mercury retrograde period is to kind of look back at what needs to be redone, rerouted, revisited, that type of thing. We're returning to it. And when Mercury is preparing to turn direct, it's important to spend some time in our mind thinking about what we want to bring out. And because it's Aquarius, Ptah, we have an opportunity to, what do we want to envision? What do we want to create? What do we want to bring forth into the world? Again, Aquarius is a planet of planetary service. So what do we want to create that in some way contributes to the greater good? It's a good time to be thinking about that. So those are the energies that are taking place this week. They're pretty intense and they're pretty strong. And there are opportunities here, as always. There's always opportunities, even with the most difficult transits. And it's particularly important for each of us to be holding that vision of the kind of world that we want to live on and the kind of planet that we want to create. And at the same time, we have to acknowledge, that's part of the square energy itself, that we have this great chasm, particularly in the United States, and I think it's also reflected worldwide, where, as I said earlier, people, even people we dearly love, we can look at the same thing and see something very different. And there's all kinds of permutations in that. It can get very confusing, the way all of this is playing out. And the visions that we're holding for the kind of world that we want to live in are incomplete, and they're also very different. And they feel at times like they're very opposed to one another, that there's a struggle there, that there's, this kind of pushing against one another. That's happening. It can be very disheartening, particularly, when someone you love doesn't see things the way you see it, and you're envisioning the world that you want to live in, and the world that they want to live in is very different. And the truth that they see is very different than the truth that you see. That's happening for us universally. I have it in my own life, and I'm sure all of you do as well. And it doesn't matter which side of the chasm you're on. This is happening, and it's disheartening for all of us, one way or another. And I think that's important to remember, that this chasm is disheartening for all of us. So, what I would like to offer today, we have in the past done a lot of journeys with the various astrological players who are important in this process, whether it be Hathor, who is allied with Taurus, or Sobek, who's allied with Saturn, or Wajat, who's allied with Uranus, or Ptah, who's allied with Aquarius. We've done journeys with all of them. So I want to do something a little bit different this week, which is to work with a star energy, which is associated, or actually 2 star energies that are associated with the Uranus-Saturn square, and in an alignment with Uranus, and in a challenging square relationship with Saturn. And these two stars are Hamal, which is the alpha star in the constellation Aries and is kind of right at the forehead of the ram. It's often called the head of the ram. And also Shadir, which is the alpha star in Cassiopeia, which is the crown constellation. You can only really see it if you live in the northern hemisphere because it's a circumpolar constellation that is close to Polaris, our North Star, and so you can't see it in the southern realms, but it has the configuration of a crown. And the reason that I want to work with the two of these is they have a similar kind of energy in that they are both about being independent, being forceful, being strong, but in different ways. Hamal is that kind of warrior sort of energy and carries that, being independent in some way, going one's own way, while Shadir is associated with the queen. And, the archetype of the queen is so interesting. I was doing some reading this morning, and the person I was reading was pointing out that for the Greeks and Romans in their constellations, and the constellations as we perceive them in the Western world come from the Greeks and the Romans. Virtually all of the feminine constellations are in chains. They are restricted in some way. They are in chains. The only one that is exempt from that is the constellation Virgo, which is the virgin, the maiden, the goddess of the harvest. The rest of them, the women are in some way chained up. And that is a reflection in many ways of the patriarchal nature of Greek and Roman culture, which in the Western world we have inherited much of that perception, much of that way of seeing the world. That when we talk about patriarchal thinking, it comes to us from the antecedents or the philosophies of Greece and Rome. And it's certainly can be found earlier than that and in other cultures, but they brought it to new heights in many ways. And we are the direct descendants, the philosophical receptors. We've received energy, we've received our philosophical perceptions from Greek and Roman culture. So I wanted to work with these two energies, and particularly thinking of them together. The story of Cassiopeia is very interesting. She was the mother of Andromeda, who was another chained goddess in the night sky, another chained woman in the night sky. And Andromeda and Cassiopeia's story is that Cassiopeia dared to claim that her daughter Andromeda, and indeed herself, were more beautiful than the Nereids, who were the sea nymphs, who were sacred and protected by Poseidon, Neptune. And this angered Neptune. He sent a storm and he sent a sea monster to claim as a sacrifice Andromeda. And so she was chained up. It's a long story. She was chained to a rock, waiting to be claimed by this sea monster. And she was saved. Perseus came and saved her. She went off with him and lived happily ever after, kind of a damsel in distress sort of story where she was saved by him and taken off to become his wife. But as punishment for Cassiopeia for daring to claim that she was more beautiful, that she was more powerful in some way, and that her daughter was more beautiful than goddesses, nymphs that were sacred to a god, she was chained upside down, which would be very uncomfortable, in the sky. That was the myth. And so it's kind of the punishment that's meted out to the woman who claims something for herself, dares to be come forward. So the archetypal queen in many myths and stories around the world has power, but it is limited. She needs, as all women have in myth, to know her place. And so I thought we would go on a journey today with the archetype of the queen. Isis is a queen, queen mother of heaven. There are many queens in myth. There are many queens in the Greek and Roman archetypes. There's Juno, Hera. There is queens of ancient Greece. there are Roman queens, there are Egyptian queens. So and their amount of power that they've had, that they've dared to claim, has been in many ways defined by their gender. I mean, this is the kind of imbalance that I was talking about earlier. So I thought we would use the archetype of our internal queen. And this doesn't matter, again, if you gender identify as a man or a woman or binary. It really does not matter, because everyone has these archetypes within them. We all do. And the archetype of the queen is that feminine expression of power. So I thought we would go on a journey with our internal archetypal queen for today. So I invite you to put your feet flat on the floor if you're sitting up. Getting comfortable if you're lying down. You can do either. It's up to you. Take a few nice deep breaths. Releasing tension, releasing resistance. And I want you to imagine that you are in a forest. It is thick, it is lush, it is dark, and you are following a pathway. Walking through the forest. And as you exit this forest, you come into a clearing and you see ahead of you a structure. It may be a castle, it may be a temple, it may be a more modest structure. But whatever it is, this is the home of your internal queen, your sovereign feminine, your strongest expression of your yin energy. And I invite you now to find an entryway into the structure, into the building, the temple, the castle, whatever it is. And as you do, and your eyes adjust to the light, you see ahead of you a woman who is sitting on a throne. And she beckons to you. She invites you to approach. And I invite you to come close to her and see her, this incredibly regal woman sitting on this throne. This is a mature woman. And as you approach her, she stands up and she comes close to you. And she stands in front of you and she looks into your eyes. If you are willing, she will take you on a journey with your internal queen. Your powerful yin energy. Again, it's not about gender. It doesn't matter what gender you identify with. We all have receptivity within us. For many of us, this sometimes feels weak, vulnerable, in a negative way. But as you look at this woman, this queen who is standing in front of you, you understand an essential truth. This woman is receptive, she is sensitive, but she is also strong. She is vulnerable, and her vulnerability is her greatest strength. I invite you now to go on a journey with your internal queen. Nice deep breath. Travel now with your internal queen, manifestation of your powerful yin energy. The queen does not want you to forget her. She has lived in the shadows for too long. She wishes to come forth in her strength, her certainty, her vulnerability, her receptivity. She wishes to come forth within you. And so your queen has a gift for you. Maybe a symbol, an object, a color, a word, a memory, a scene. Whatever it is, Receive her gift. Take it into you in some way. Breathe it in. Make it a part of you. So you do not forget this essential part of you, this strength, this power that is so connected to the receptive capacity of the heart. And you are aware now that Isis has joined you, as she always does at the end of these meditations. Perhaps your manifestation of your queen has been Isis. Perhaps she's come in another form. Truly, they are one and the same. Isis is a queen, Queen Mother of Heaven. She wraps her rainbow wings around you. And she pulls close also your archetypal expression of your queen, your internal queen. She holds the two of you close as an activation of this powerful energy within. It is time for this long held down, disavowed, demeaned, and in many ways abused aspect of our psyche, our collective human psyche, to come into balance. All actions, all manifestation, all of it must come from the heart. Create what you want to receive. Nice deep breath. Come gently back into the room. Thank you. We will speak again.